Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Economic Club of Indiana. For the new folks in the crowd, the Economic Club of Indiana is the place where Central Indiana's current and emerging leaders are challenged by extraordinary speakers and engaged collectively in advancing great ideas for the common good. This commitment has now been carried out for nearly 50 years, so thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jeffrey Harrison. I'm the President and CEO of Citizens Energy Group, as well as the President of the Economic Club of Indiana for the 2023-2024 season. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the contributions of our platinum sponsors. That means the organizations with banners outlined in gold have been sponsors for at least 10 years. Thank you again to these tremendous supporters of our mission. I see a lot of new faces in the crowd today. Are you attending the Economic Club of Indiana for the first time? If you are, please raise your hand. Excellent. Welcome. Welcome, and it's good to see you, and thanks for being here today. We have a phenomenal program today, but there's still more to come this season, and we hope to see you back again for a future event. Be sure to check out the remainder of this season's lineup, and please begin to look ahead to our 50th anniversary season. You can find out more about becoming a member or sponsor at economicclubofindiana.com. Now I'd like to introduce the President's Table, and would each of you please stand when I introduce you. Representing our presenting sponsor, One America Financial, is Heather Dawson, Vice President of Workplace Solutions for Retirement Service. Join me in a big round of applause in thanking One America Financial. Next, we have Nate Feltman, the CEO and publisher of today's luncheon sponsor, IBJ Media. Next, we have Governor Eric Holcomb. Governor Holcomb is the 51st governor of Indiana and a lifelong Hoosier, born right here in Indianapolis. Then we have Mayor Joe Hogsett, the 49th mayor of the great city of Indianapolis and former secretary of the state of Indiana. We also welcome Carrie Prather, president of Franklin College. Franklin College has been a platinum sponsor of the Economic Club of Indiana for over 10 years. Thank you, Carrie. Next, we have Gary Dick, the host of IBJ Media's Inside Indiana Business with Gary Dick. Representing Indiana basketball today is Herb Simon, the owner of the Indiana Pacers. We also have Rick Fuson, the CEO of Pacers Sports and Entertainment. And last but not least, we have our guest of honor, Mr. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA. Thank you all for joining us to today's festivities. Will you please join me in one round of a final applause for our President's Table guests? I want to be sure to acknowledge the incredible amount of work that went into making today's luncheon a reality. So thank you to Mel Raines, the president and COO of Pacers Sports and Entertainment, and a member of the Economic Club Board of Governors. Thank you, Mel. And finally, I'd like to thank the fantastic effort of the Economic Club Board of Governors, Program Committee, WFYI team, and event staff in helping to make today a possibility. Please join me in one round of applause. As always, please share your takeaways from today's discussion with us online, social media. We're on Facebook and on LinkedIn at the Economic Club of Indiana and on X at Economic Club IN. Be sure to use hashtag EconLunch and hashtag NBA All-Star Game to inform everyone that you're involved in today's conversations at the Economic Club of Indiana surrounding the 2024 All-Star Game. Now for a few administrative items. Denison Parking has provided a special parking rate of $12 for today's event. So if you parked in the Plaza Garage, please be sure to pick up a QR code from our event staff after the lunch. Also, you will find on your tables a white card. If you have a question for today's speaker, you can fill out one of those cards, raise it up during the program, and our event staff will be around to collect your questions. You can also post your questions on X to @EconomicClubIN. Please enjoy your lunch and conversation at your table, and the program will begin shortly. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice job. Good afternoon again, everyone. Good afternoon. It is my great honor to introduce our speaker, who I'm very excited to hear from today. Many of us know his story, but just a few highlights about our keynote speaker, Adam Silver, Commissioner for the NBA. Silver joined the NBA in 1992. Before becoming Commissioner, he served as NBA Deputy Commissioner and Chief Operating Officer, President and Chief Operating Officer of NBA Entertainment, NBA Chief of Staff, and Special Assistant to the Commissioner. Adam Silver presides over a global sports and media organization built around 5 professional sports leagues: the NBA, WNBA, NBA G League, NBA 2K League, and Basketball Africa League. This is just a sampling of the impact he's had with his decision and dedication to growing basketball around the world by promoting health and fitness and using the sport to bring people together. Please help me welcome Adam Silver and Gary Dick as we invite them up to the stage.
Jeff, thank you very much. Commissioner, welcome to Indianapolis.
Thank you, Jeff. Gary, great to be here.
Yeah, it's, to say the least, this is an exciting time in Indianapolis, a big event city. How many cities do you go to where there's a basketball court in the airport?
0. And by the way, it's a testament to how much traffic your airport gets, because for the however many weeks that court has been down, several times a week, I get photos, text messages from friends, emails saying, "You're not going to believe it, the Indianapolis airport." And I'm like,
That's great.
I have seen it, but it's great. A lot of people are coming through here.
Yeah, well, as you know, Commissioner, Indianapolis has developed certainly a well-earned reputation as a big event city. And you have talked about Indianapolis as a city that works. Talk about what you mean by that. You travel, of course, around the globe, and you look at Indianapolis as an elite big event city.
Well, I'm looking at, of course, the governor and the mayor who are sitting right here in front of me and were introduced before, but I mean that in a positive way, and just I think it's a testament again that here you all are just sitting here together for an event like this, and I can say I do travel a lot of cities, and it doesn't work this way. It just doesn't. People aren't coming together from across the state, from across the community for big events in this way. Just look at the ratings that the Super Bowl just got. It's a demonstration that there are very few things left that people truly come together for, and big time sports is one of those things. And I think you guys have just figured out how to do it, not just in sports, but at big events. I think it goes to the values of this city, to the state, to how maybe Midwestern values, the belief in sports, the belief in coming together, the civic pride this town takes when an event is awarded. It's all hands on deck. I think Rick Fuson, who, by the way, people have been asking me in the last few days, boy, so much has changed in your term during the time you've been with the league and the NBA, and I go, yeah, but the one thing that hasn't changed is Herb Simon and Rick Fuson running the Indiana Pacers. And I'm not tying that to when, Jeff said when I got to the NBA in the early 90s, I'm tying that to when the All-Star game was last year in 1985. The same people were running it. It's quite remarkable. But Jim Morris, I'm not sure if he's here today, but I know that I always am somewhat joking with Jim Morris, but again, a lot of the same people are sitting here are with us, that when I travel around the league, it feels like an event when I come here, that I think many folks here take it for granted that we actually sit and have a dinner, and often the governor and the mayor there and other representatives of the state legislature, the city council, and we're sitting around just talking about the city and all the things we do together. And that generally when I go to other places, people aren't taking the time to do that. And it's not about me, it's just that that's not something people do on a regular basis in other cities. So I would just say to all you here today, the business leaders, members of this community, government officials, you should be incredibly proud of that, because I have a pretty good perspective on many different cities, and there isn't another one like this one.
Yeah, well said. Forgot to mention off the top, you have white cards at the table. I'm sure you all have some questions you want me to address to the commissioner. Please fill those out and they'll be delivered up here to stage.
That's very old school.
It is, yes, old school.
Messengers running them up.
Right, exactly. Commissioner, you mentioned Herb Simon, the Simon family. I'd be interested in your perspective on the impact the Simon family has had on the league, certainly on Indianapolis, the Pacers, our city, our state, but also on the league over these past years.
Sure, and I know Steve Simon took my seat when I got up, so I'm going to recognize him too, but other Simon family members are here, so hello to all of them. Again, Herb Simon is, I never say oldest, he's the longest standing owner in the NBA. He may happen to be the oldest, but he's the longest standing owner in the NBA. And by the way, I won't mention names, but for all discussion about certain national politicians and their age and all that, there's no one who's more on it than Herb, and he attends every committee meeting, reads all the materials, constantly on the phone with me, not just about the Pacers, but about other ideas. Obviously is hosting this All-Star game, is fully engaged with it, and it just is a pleasure to be around. But I think that he, in many ways, as the longest standing owner, sets the tone for the league. And even as new owners come into this league, and a few have in the last few years, often one of the first meetings is with Herb. And I think it's important to me. He's the former chairman of our board. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I think a word you often hear from Herb, and I assume it's not just in sports, but other people who have been in business with Simon Properties or with Herb, is we're partners. And frankly, I think that concept is sometimes lost, because in a league, of course, the goal of the teams is to kill each other on the floor, literally, right? I mean, it's win at all costs, but not to lose sight of the fact that as soon as the game ends, we're partners in building this enterprise. And part of being a partner in enterprise is even making sacrifices to create a more competitive league. I mean, people, it's interesting. Every so often at the league, when we're getting ready for collective bargaining or other large reviews in the league, we'll bring in some outside advisors, just get some fresh eyes. I'm sure a lot of people in this room do this, consultants and others. And often it's an economist, and he or she will take back to their office our Constitution, our bylaws, all these the principal documents for the league. And I've just been going through this so long. It's funny, when they come in, they're so anxious. They have things to tell us. It's a few weeks later. And it invariably begins something along the lines with, you have it completely backwards. I'm like, what's that? He goes, your incentives are all wrong. You give to the worst performing team the first pick in the draft. Like, don't you understand? That's not. Now, of course, over the years, we've added a draft lottery, other things to do with that, so we don't actually a complete incentive to be bad, but also in this league, something, that special delivery, something that Herb has been at the center of is revenue sharing. And again, that it can be a contentious issue in the league, but ultimately teams come together and recognize that if you want to be a 30-team league, that there are opportunities to generate money in Los Angeles that don't exist in Indianapolis. It's just the nature of the number of businesses, the size of the community. And really, at the end of the day, even when you think about the country, often you hear about this distinction between large markets and small markets. We're generally a league of small markets because most cities are on the smaller side. There's only so many truly large cities. And so I think what Herb has been incredible doing is that concept of partnership, translating that to, you need a collective bargaining system where every team can be in a position to compete. Doesn't guarantee anybody anything. You still, you need great people like Kevin Pritchard and great coaches like Rick Carlisle, great business folks like Rick Fuson, but you then are in a position, and I'm not going to sit here and say everything is equal and have we gotten better over the years? Yes, we're constantly improving the system. But, that notion of partnership, and I just say lastly, I think that tone translates to our relationship with the players. Because they, of course, are partners in this league too. Doesn't mean things aren't adversarial at times, but when it's a little bit of a misnomer sometimes to talk about a salary cap. And the basic concept is the same in the NFL, NHL, and the NBA. I mean, we have different individual team caps, but at root, it's a macro system that shares aggregate revenue. So in the case of the NBA, I'm simplifying it a little bit, but it's essentially 50% of the revenue we generate goes to the players. And the way you come up with a salary cap is you take that 50%, you divide it by 30. So it's a cap on one hand, but it's also a floor. And so talk about creating incentives. And David Stern, by the way, deserves so much credit. I mean, he was the principal author of this system. And then all the other leagues implemented it. Baseball has a different system, but essentially the NFL and hockey. And so when we're out, driving, new business, growing our business, trying to increase, our media dollars or whatever else, the players understand that they get 50% of that. So they're incentivized to do all the things we are. Now, it's not perfect that somebody's short-term incentive isn't necessarily the same as somebody's long-term incentive, and that's what bargaining's for, and that's what unions are for, and you have to work through those issues. But it's a pretty good system from that standpoint. And again, just back to my friend Herb, he's been a principal visionary behind all of that, always standing up for the smaller markets and saying, we got to have a 30-team league. That's what's going to grow this sport over time.
Let's talk about the business of the league and how things have changed since Indianapolis hosted that first All-Star game for the city back in 1985. A lot has changed with the city and with the league as well. Perhaps foremost, becoming a global brand and a global league, going from an American league to a truly global league. 200 plus nations, countries, and territories are going to see this weekend's game. Talk about that. I know you inherited that. Commissioner Stern really was a focus for him. You've taken that to a new level. Why is that important, and what can we expect next from that global impression?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, David had that vision of taking this league globally, and I inherited that vision. What essentially has changed since I've been commissioner, I mean, it was beginning to change while David was commissioner as well, is the availability of digital streaming media technology that now allows anyone, essentially anywhere in the world, to take out a smartphone and watch these games in high quality, essentially HD video. I mean, that was something. I remember one of my prior jobs was running NBA entertainment at the NBA before I had become deputy commissioner. And in those days, and many people are familiar with this business, we would have to send games by satellite, right, live everywhere in the world. Sometimes there were, fiber under oceans and things like that. And that wasn't everywhere. And even once the games were then received by some, a dish by a station in some country, then how they, in turn, were then going to have to distribute those games out in their market. Often it'd be several days later. We're past the generation now, but not that far past the generation of players where, again, I worked at NBA Entertainment for a long time. We used to produce many of those videos, Come Fly With Me, videos on Larry Bird, others, and that you would hear, maybe up to about 10 years ago, young players would come to the league, particularly international players, and they would say, I grew up watching that video over and over and over again. That's how I learned the game. There was no YouTube. You couldn't just go on the internet and say, you couldn't go into Google and say how to shoot a free throw and, and see a million different moves and things like that. So that's really, the technology has helped me enormously. I'd say in terms of the vision why, and again, I know it's the case of many of the businesses in this room, that growth, when you look at a property like the NBA that has global appeal, U.S. is less than 5% of the world, and so that growth is going to come outside the United States. We're incredibly fortunate in that we have a game that's been an Olympic sport since the 1930s. We're the second most played sport in the world after soccer, and I'm pretty sure we're the fastest growing pickleball, maybe in the United States, but
right.
My caveat, but globally, we are the fastest growing sport. In fact, just in the last Olympics in Tokyo. Of course, basketball has been a mainstay of the Olympics for many years. They now added a second basketball competition. We have outdoor 3-on-3 basketball, men's and women's, that have been added to Olympics, more of a sort of, beach volleyball type environment, music, et cetera, but more basketball, more countries participating. So to me, it's a little bit, maybe it sounds corny, but to think it's the manifest destiny of this league to continue growing. And I'd say, Mayor Governor Holcomb, we were in India together in 2019, right before the pandemic, because you were on a trade mission, then you went on to China on a trade mission on behalf of Indiana. It just shows how you can use basketball globally. But I also, part of my job that I take very seriously, and we don't always get it right, but back to my earlier point that if you look in the U.S., sports is one of the only things that truly brings people together. It's also the case globally. I think why things like the Olympics are so important, the World Cup is so important, and I certainly, am a big believer in diplomacy. We could debate soft power and all that, but I think having sport that travels, our league right now has close to 30% of our players were born outside the United States. Increasingly, some of the very best players in the United States, very best players in the NBA were born outside the United States. So it's a global language of sorts, and in a world where the only way to get issues like health, we saw it in the pandemic, or certainly climate issues, economic issues, are to deal with those as a planet. So I think then what we do, and I'm not saying it's all just for the greater good, we are a business, but I think the implications of a global sport and a sport that can bring people together is truly important for the health and well-being of all of us.
In terms of the future, can we expect new international markets for franchises? Mexico City has been talked about.
Yeah, so we've played a lot of regular season games in Mexico City. Frankly, it's easier from New York to get to Mexico City than it is to get to LA, so it's doable. There are issues in Mexico City in terms of altitude, pollution, some other things that I think could be worked through over time. We're not ready to do it yet. I'll say back to my early days of the NBA, when we expanded to Canada, at the time we did that in the early 90s, people were saying it's just a hockey country. They're not going to really adapt to basketball. Now we have, a dozen or so incredible players from Canada. It's incredibly popular sport among young people, particularly in a very, diverse, increasingly diverse country, particularly in Ontario, Toronto. So that's going very well. I could imagine us, every time Mexico City, I think about the fact that it's a city of 22 million people. I think it's the largest city in North America, a huge Hispanic American population. So that's something we will look at some point. I think in terms of expansion to Europe, this was something that David talked a lot about. I think logistically, in some ways we know more now than we did then about the impact of jet lag, travel, lack of sleep, crossing time zones. It's interesting, I think about all the technological advances. The one thing that's in many ways gone backwards is air travel, in that when we were younger, there used to be the Concorde. I know there's talk now that there may be some supersonic planes that come back. If there was a way to get from the East Coast to Europe in 3 hours, maybe we'd look more seriously at it. But independent of expansion, there's a league called the Euro League in Europe. We're having ongoing discussions with them about how we can partner with them, help build the sport there. Jeff mentioned the introduction during the pandemic. Actually, we formed a new league in Africa with our federation, FIBA. It's called Basketball Africa League with 12 teams. We're doing a lot there. I think it's well known, and Herb's been very involved in this initiative of growing basketball in China. That's something we're continuing to focus on. As I said, it's an Olympic sport. It's popular all over the world, and one thing we're the huge beneficiary of, wherever, unlike soccer, again, the biggest sport in the world, where there's multiple top-notch leagues. For those in the room who follow soccer, and increasingly people are following not just MLS, but European soccer. They could be fans of teams in the English Premier League or La Liga or Bundesliga. Basketball's different. If you grow up, young boy, and increasingly I should say, as a young girl, dreaming of playing in the NBA or the WNBA, that's the league. You're not you may be also thinking about playing for your national team, for your national players, but wherever you are in the world, you're like, I want to be in the NBA or the WNBA if you're a great player, and that's a huge advantage for us.
I want to get to some questions from the audience, but you mentioned streaming. Your TV deal is up after next season,
yes.
I believe. And that's a lot of people who have their eyes on that. You mentioned streaming. I think the current deal you have is valued at around $24 billion, is what I'm.
Over the course of the
10
entire deal.
Yeah, right. Talk of that tripling maybe. So we'll see.
I've asked Herb to stop saying that.
Very good. But what about the streaming piece of that? It's increasingly part of all of our lives and it's part of the sports world. How do you look at streaming as part of this new deal?
I look at it as invariably it will be part of how we receive programming in the future, just as we are now. I mean, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but it's hard to imagine there's many people in this room that don't subscribe to some streaming platform, you know, whether it's Max or Netflix or Hulu or whatever else, or Amazon Prime. And increasingly, that's a way that people get programming. And it's also, when you move from traditional cable and satellite to streaming, which is a form of internet TV, it also allows for all kinds of functionality that you can't do through traditional television. And it also, that functionality can all be personalized and customized. So I'll just use one example that's controversial in some ways, and that is sports betting. Something now that is legal in 35 states, last I looked. I get it, it's not for everybody. I mean, if it were up to me, we would have, I'm not against it because I think once the internet disrupted sort of the traditional gaming business, there was no stopping of it. I used to say before it was, quote, legal in all these states, before there was a Supreme Court decision that changed the law, that you could still go to Google and type in bet NFL, bet NBA, and there were lots of sites and little symbols for credit cards and things. So people were already engaged in it. But I think, you know, now it's everywhere. I mean, people, again, who are watching the Super Bowl, there's a lot of sports betting advertising, and our sport isn't that different. But when you get to the point where you can start customizing and personalizing these feeds, if you don't want anything to do with sports betting, click, it's off. You know, I choose not to be bombarded with any of that. Or if you're, on the other hand, if you're somebody who's interested in odds and interested in betting and interested in unique things, that's available to you too. If you're somebody who wants to shop while you're watching games, Tyrese Halliburton, I love his shoes, click, I want to buy them, done. You know, if you're somebody who wants to be part of a community, talking to their friends while the game's on, all those things will become available in streaming and they'll make it more accessible. So I think we're going to see a transition of types. Traditional cable and satellite certainly aren't done yet. There's still a vast portion of America is still receiving their games that way, or their programming. And just lastly, I mean, it's interesting how wrong some of the predictions have been. I mean, a decade ago at a lot of these technology conferences, people were saying broadcast television is done. And now the NFL just set an all-time record, 123 million plus. By the way, that's in the ratings world, that's the average number of viewers per minute. That's not the total number of people watched. Over 200 million Americans out of 330 Americans watched some portion of the Super Bowl. So which I think is a great sign for the industry and a great sign for sports. So my sense is, as we move forward, we have great partnership with Disney, we have great partnership with Warner Brothers Discovery. Incidentally, Disney they own ESPN, they're in the Disney Plus business, the ESPN Plus business. Warner Brothers Discovery owns Max, they're in that business. It'll be a hybrid, and our partners are moving in that same direction.
Well, I mentioned just recently ESPN, Fox, and Warner Brothers announced this mega app, streaming app. Your take on that? It's new, it's just out there, it surprised some. But those three powerhouses getting together, how do you think it'll impact professional sports, in particular the NBA?
My honest answer is I'm not sure yet. We're just learning more about that venture. I think they're still trying to work through exactly what it'll be. I think for people in the industry, they think of it as a so-called skinny bundle. When you think about it, what the cable bundle, the basic package you have to buy now, is at a certain price point. That the idea here was there are a number of viewers, fans. A generalization, I'd say, was they tend to be younger, people who choose not to subscribe to cable or have cut the cord. And I see it potentially as another alternative for them, for somebody as a cheaper alternative that says, I don't want 500 channels, but I want the channels in particular that have sports programming on them, and I'm willing to pay for them. And so to me, at the end of the day, more consumer, more fan choice is positive, and that's what I'm hoping this is.
Yeah. Question from the audience, Commissioner, what has been your biggest success? I think you're just 10 years, maybe past 10 years on the job, so a decade on the job. Your biggest success as Commissioner, and what do you think led to that success? I know that's a tough one, but give you a minute to think about it.
You know, honestly, it's hard to think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we just get through every day. I mean, I maybe one thing I'll point to is we got through the pandemic. I mean, that we were forced to shut down like so many businesses were for the pandemic, and we found a way, working closely with our Players Association, closely with the Disney company, who is our television partner, but of course also owns Disney World. And we found a way to reopen in this so-called bubble. I think many of you are familiar with it, but at the time, I mean, it's interesting now as I hear the debate, you know, obviously I don't want to get in the middle of that about vaccines or not and all that, but just a reminder, it wasn't that many years ago when people were Cloroxing FedEx boxes and people were afraid to lose their homes. And when we went to our players and said, we have this idea, again, this was many months before vaccines came out, and said, we think we can, in a safe way, go through a protocol where, you know, you'll be in seclusion for a week, you'll come in, we'll do daily testing of everyone in this environment, and we think we can find a way to play our games, and Disney will support us, and they need programming during the pandemic. There were, I mean, endless, very nervous calls, and understandably players who were saying, put aside, I think, the concern of leaving their families, some with young children at that moment in time, is this really safe? You know, that we're going to be breathing each other's air, like, because we looked into it, like, and the doctor said you can't wear a mask and play basketball. It's just for your respiratory system. You just can't do. I mean, we actually looked at that, but we think for those who play basketball, they're literally right mouth to mouth something with somebody in cases, you know, getting a rebound or whatever else. And also, we weren't, of course, going to be outdoors, so it wasn't conducive either. And with the help of, you know, a lot of great doctors and scientists and others, we came up with the system, and we got through that bubble, which went from essentially the beginning of July all the way to October for the teams that were in the finals without a single positive case, and this is pre-vaccine. So we thought it was great at the time that it was great to provide programming for people who are interested, and I think other industries were inspired by it and said, oh, there's a way, you know, movie companies went back to work. They said, okay, we worked with a lot of other industries, said, we're open book, here's our protocol, try these things. We did the same thing then with the WNBA, and managed to do the same thing, get their league, stand their league up as well.
How challenging as a leader was that for you personally? I mean, the pandemic was a challenge for all of us, obviously, but as the head of a major professional sports league where the spotlight is constantly on you, how personally, from a leadership standpoint, how difficult?
The honest answer, was incredibly tough. I mean, thank you to Herb, who I was talking to probably almost every day, and also a great group of team owners. We were, I think, Herb doing, you know, in some cases daily Zoom calls. I mean, Zoom was not a platform we had been using for official work before the pandemic, but that ability to get everybody on quickly and have, you know, Steve was on a lot of those calls, to have ongoing discussions for them, our team owners, to also be hearing from the same outside experts we were and make their own assessments, because there's enormous risk in doing this. But the answer is, it was an incredibly stressful time, because also I have young children, but I was as isolated as everyone else was. So even though it's, you know, and I think everyone's realizing now, certainly those platforms, Zoom, Teams, others, they're certainly not a replacement for this. Thank God we're all together, or for sitting across from people and hugging people and watching their body language and all that. And so I was physically isolated in doing it, and also the stakes were enormously high. And as we all know, it became very political in terms of what we were doing. Then George Floyd was killed. There was a Black Lives Matter movement. It was, you know, we're a league of 80% black players. I think there were a lot of the players I was talking to, there was all the concerns I already raised, but I legitimate, and it's easy to look back now and say, well, this is what Black Lives Matter means now and everything, but in that moment in time when 26 million Americans were protesting on the streets, you can understand players saying, earnestly, is this the right thing for me? Should I be leaving my community, leaving my family, playing basketball at the end of the day, in this sort of privileged position, down in Disney World while these cities that I grew up in are burning, and so, and ultimately they made the decision, and we collectively made the decision with some help from lots of people outside of our community, and again, it was on both sides of the aisle, said to us, ultimately, we think you can have the most impact because you're still otherwise going to be isolated. You can come together through all these different platforms. You can speak to the world about the things you care about, and you'll have an opportunity to be together and try to work through those issues. So again, hindsight's 2020. I thought, though, how they handled it and how we got through with it, but it was, what was particularly stressful is, again, these lab tests, these were lab PCR tests, if people remember, as opposed to rapid tests. So every morning, everyone was tested, and we had all these contracts with labs, but then you'd sort of wait to hear, like, oh my God, is this the day when we're going to have a rash of positive cases? Because just more than people probably want to hear, but we say it was a bubble, but there were Disney workers, by just definition, couldn't live in there. We didn't have enough tests to test all of them daily, and they wouldn't agree to daily testing for all of them. So even though remember masks and people would wear those shields, and so it all seems so ancient history, but physically distant and all that, put the food over here, then leave the room. But there were all kinds of people moving in and out of this community every day. So in retrospect, of course that's going to work, but it seemed really risky. And so yes, all I can say was it was enormously stressful at the time.
Yeah, during your 10 years, you've not been afraid to innovate, to try new things, including the in-season tournament, right? And I was one of those people that said, what is this in-season tournament? Didn't understand it. Now that it's in the rearview mirror, I thought it was great. Talk about, as I understand it, that idea was not new. It really came up during your predecessor's term, and he kind of passed it on to you to bring it to life.
I think like so many ideas, it comes down to execution as opposed to the idea. I mean, I don't even remember when we first started discussing it, but this notion of, I think it started, we were calling it a mid-season tournament. It ended up being called an in-season tournament because it wasn't quite at the midpoint of the season. But it really stemmed more from watching what other leagues around the world are doing. As I said, I pay a lot of attention to what's happening in global soccer just to see, are there things that we can do as a global league that they're doing? And one of the things global soccer has, and if somebody here is a fan of Manchester United or Arsenal team in the English Premier League, they have many different tournaments within the season, and generally referred to as cups. I mean, I analogize it a little bit to what you see in college basketball as well. Often you'll have the holiday tournament, the Thanksgiving tournament, whatever else. And I think for those teams, no one's there is thinking that's the equivalent of winning the NCAA tournament, but if you go to one of these holiday tournaments, you certainly want to win, and there's benefits to winning and all that. I think interesting, when we first started discussing the concept with our players, the international players got it right away because they grew up in an environment, in soccer in particular, where there were lots of different cups. And they, for a lot of the American NBA players, their first reaction, understandably, was, wait, this is all about winning the Larry O'Brien Trophy. Who's going to care about an in-season tournament cup or anything else? And then, frankly, as we started getting into that with them, and part of it is the business upside, part of it was to make those games in the fourth quarter, fall of the year, more meaningful to our fans. And I think the success Indiana had was a perfect example. I mean, stepped up, played incredibly well, brought enormous additional national attention to Tyrese and your team. And it also makes the point, like when you get down to a single elimination tournament like that, it's kind of, in many ways, what makes NCAA basketball so special, that it may be the case that if you play 7 games, I mean, one thing we know is for sure, just statistically, the more games you play, the more likely the better team is to win over time. But, you increase randomness. You have shorter competition. And, so sorry. And so, am I still on? Yeah, so we were very happy with the first iteration of it, and we'll continue to grow from there.
Question from the audience, can you talk about financial impact from the in-season tournament? Was it a success financial?
We made a decision there that, especially given what was going on in the world and with our economy, we didn't think it was appropriate to go to our current media partners who we've had long-term relationships with and say, pay us this additional amount and then we'll do it. So we made a bet, and I think it was the right one, that if we could prove the concept and then we were going into television negotiations, people would see, aha, that's something that has independent value. And that fact has been borne out. I mean, we're just in discussions now. We're a ways away from having new television deals. But so I think it was a demonstration that there was value, and I don't think there's any doubt you'll see then real value that comes from it in our new media relationships.
As you look at tweaks that you may make to the in-season tournament, it was in Vegas, right?
Yes.
Looking at any other markets, like Indianapolis, maybe?
By the way, absolutely, we love being here. I will say I have mixed feelings on it because, number one, and I think this is true for most sports, most of us aren't built to have neutral site games. And I don't necessarily think we thought otherwise, but even you saw it play out a little bit here in Indiana. Asking people, particularly in December on short notice, season ticket holders, fans, to say, oh, get out to Las Vegas. I just think it's hard in people's lives. Everybody's busy, getting flights, getting, flights at the last minute, hotel rooms, et cetera. So the notion was, well, in a city like Vegas, there's a built-in audience for that. I'll be honest, I think it wasn't. We did well attendance-wise, but partly because the Laker fan base is pretty large in Las Vegas just because of proximity. So you had a lot of Laker fans there. So I think it's something we'll continue to look at. I will just say, looking, Rick and Mel, it's a scheduling nightmare. That's one of the problems because all of you can kind of imagine what happens if you're playing games early on in the season that count both as regular season games and then tournament games. Then you get down to a knockout round, so you have to realign teams playing. Teams then lose. They still got to make up their 82-game schedule. It's just a nightmare because we're saying, hold this date, hold that date, hold that date. And, your arena here, just like all the great arenas, I wish it were the case that we had a blank slate just to schedule basketball, but lots of other events, great concerts, all kinds of other things happening in these arenas. So it's not an easy thing to do. I'll just leave it at that.
Another question from the audience, talking about Major League Baseball with its Field of Dreams. The NHL does its outdoor series. Is there anything you're exploring at the NBA or the NBA can do from kind of those unique type of one-off type things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we think about those things all the time. We are a little bit limited. We've looked at doing different types of outdoor games, and it gets dicey just because of any bit of moisture and just things that could be potentially unsafe for our players. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Outdoor Classic, Field of Dreams. I mean, I think those things are wonderful. I recognize in some ways our answer in part was the in-season tournament, just creating things that are special. I think a lot of the things that we do internationally, like we've been playing in Abu Dhabi the last 2 years, I mean, at least in those markets, that's incredibly special for those folks to bring your game there. But that's something we're going to keep looking at.
I think the audience, they want to get into your head here and see what might be new out there. The next question I have here is what the NFL did with the Toy Story football game. And the animation, all that kind of stuff was a big success, or seemed to be a success. Is there any talk of doing something like that, the co-branding, all the things that go along with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've experimented with Disney and doing similar things. Again, back to my earlier point about the ability with streaming to customize. I mean, I talked about some examples where, at betting or, merchandising, but of course, a presentation for kids, one just begin with fundamentally how the game is being presented. It's for play-by-play announcers, presumably she is trying to find sort of the midpoint of the fan base, not to go too deep, but but to accept that there's a certain amount of knowledge out there. I think if you knew you were broadcasting to younger people, instead of saying pick and roll or block charge, you'd be explaining things as you went. You'd be giving more explanation around the league. You'd be telling more stories about the players and their backgrounds and things like that. And the graphics are part of it too. I mean, I watched a little bit of that Nickelodeon Super Bowl presentation just because I was curious. And we have experimented with things like that. If you think about our video game, NBA 2K, and Jeff mentioned we have a league that's associated with that as well. But a lot of it for young people who are these days are actually introduced to basketball through that game. And a lot of it is just, it's very visually appealing. You know, the flames shoot out of the basket when the ball goes in and things like that. And, you know, there's no reason, again, when you can personalize a screen, you know, and whether you're a kid or you're sort of an older fan who just wants to have some fun, that you can't create all kinds of interesting graphics just to make it more engaging.
Yeah, one of the questions was about the 2K League, so I wanted to ask you that. How would you gauge the success of the 2K League thus far?
You know, well, I'll say you said earlier that you guys are innovators and you're willing to try new things, and I think in a willingness to try new things, you have to recognize that everything's not going to work the way you want the first time around. And I think the 2K League is an example of that. Again, back to our friends at Simons, who, whatever leagues we've created over the league, the WNBA, the 2K League, you know, G League, you name it, Herb's always, you know, and Steve, first to raise their hands and say, we're in. You know, we trust the league, and Rick, and turn their organizations upside down in order to participate. I have tremendous belief in the 2K League. I mean, it just, people are not gamers in this room. Some people still think it's Madden. I mean, NBA 2K is the most popular team game, you know, on the marketplace, you know, essentially in North America. It's enormously popular. And we also see it increasingly when we're interviewing fans. I never anticipated this, but basketball is the #1 participation sport in this country. It's the #1 in the US, it's #2 in the world. And a lot of young fans are introduced to the game basketball through 2K, not like in gym class like I was as a kid. And that like inspires them to want to bounce the basketball. So I think we're making, tweak would be too minor. We're making some significant changes to the league. We brought in some new folks to help do it. We're partnering with Take-Two, the company that produces the video game. But I think this is something we should stick at. I think there's I think there's a real opportunity to really build not just that league as an independent entity, but continue to build interest in the sport of basketball.
About 2 minutes left here, Commissioner, but looking forward, you talked about the continued...
I apologize, we have a pile of papers here.
I know, lots of questions.
Yeah.
In terms of what's next, you talk about the continued global expansion. As you look at what fans can expect from the NBA going forward, anything in particular that stands out in terms of as you continue to look at growth opportunities?
I'd say I'm particularly excited about technology. I guess it was a week and a half ago or so, Apple introduced the new Vision Pro glasses, and Tim Cook, who's the CEO, chose to come to the NBA offices that day. There's an Apple store on Fifth Avenue, the same Fifth Avenue that Larry Bird
drove the Indy car, that's right.
But I think he went right by that Apple store. But so they introduced the glasses there that morning, and then his folks chose the NBA because we had developed a new app for the Vision Pro, and we came in, we did a demonstration. He came with his own media, and we talked about it. And it's early days. I mean, for those who've had an opportunity to experiment, I think it's still, the glasses will invariably get lighter and smaller, et cetera. But when you start to look at what you can do with augmented reality, I mean, somebody I felt misquoted me the other day because they said, Adam Silver said it's better than a courtside seat. I don't think there's anything like a courtside seat in all of sports. The problem is it's 100 people, whatever the number is per arena. Talk about, everybody in business thinks about scaling. You, by definition, can't scale a courtside seat. On the other hand, to the extent you can replicate that experience as close as you can make it and different in other ways, 1 billion people can experiment on a global basis. And you can take people, I always say, if 99+% of our fans are outside the United States, by definition, they're never going to step foot in an NBA arena, or most likely not in Canada as well. And so the question is, using technology like these new Apple Vision Pro, or what Meta is doing, similar type technology, how can we create an engaging experience that will seem very special to people, bring them close to the game, have unique attributes, and again, and most importantly, keep them engaged over the course of the game. And I think the opportunities are incredible. We have something called the Technology Summit we're doing tomorrow morning. One of the things I'm going to talk about is that when we started that Technology Summit, it was in 2000, it was 24 years ago, and it just happened to be out in Oakland that year, the Bay Area, for the Warriors were hosting, and I think we were actually in San Francisco for the Technology Summit, and Herb, you were there. And that was right at the so-called .com boom, and there were so many skeptics at the time. You know, and they were right, you could argue. There was, of course, a bust then followed from a market, in terms of financial markets, but everybody who said the internet would fundamentally transform our businesses and our lives in 2000 was right. And I think it's a similar inflection point now with AI. I mean, I'm shifting slightly from augmented reality, but it's related. And I'm spending a lot of time thinking, well, what would that mean for sports? And I have no doubt it will change the experience and how we can deliver it to people. It will change, it will change how we sell our tickets. It'll change how we keep our players healthy, because the ability to process enormous amounts of data. So this is a really interesting time right now. These new technology platforms, brought to bear, the streaming platforms we mentioned earlier, sort of the existing media companies making this transition, and a marketplace of new technology. And the great thing about having a brand, a sport like the NBA with such global appeal, and as I said earlier, I'm just a big believer in the marketplace. You create back this notion of incentives. Just like you saw once when the iPhone initially launched, there was a small group of apps that were created by Apple, and then they opened it up, and now it's unlimited. And you can do, clearly using an iPhone for phone calls is a small minority of what we do on those devices. Right. And I just think that ability to take this great global content and bring it to those technologies will just fundamentally change the experience for all of us.
Well, Commissioner, on behalf of everyone here, I know the City of Indianapolis, State of Indiana, appreciate your perspective, really appreciate your leadership as well. Adam Silver, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope you're able to enjoy the NBA All-Star festivities this weekend. A few more items. A video of today's presentation will be available online at economicclubofindiana.com. Please join us next month on March 19th when we welcome Dennis Murphy, the President and CEO of IU Health. Also, please be sure to purchase your tickets for this engaging conversation at economicclubofindiana.com. As a reminder, don't forget that QR code if you parked in the Plaza parking garage. And again, let's thank Adam Silver and Gary Dick one more time, please. Everyone, please have a safe and enjoyable weekend. Thank you.